What's up, team? High performance coach and lab analyst Dan Garner here, and in this video I want to talk to you a little bit about what happened to our boy Mark. We had a big scare, a little bit of an event happen this past week where our man, and he's told the story on social media, he's told the story on a podcast that we've done, and essentially what happened was not one single thing, but a handful of things happening at the same time that just tipped him a little bit over the edge. Let's talk a little bit about what happened with the understanding that even the medical team at the hospital doesn't know exactly what happened. So this is all a very much educated hypotheses and theory as to what happened, but glad my boy is safe and sound. First off, he is running and he's absolutely feeling great. So to some extent, you would want to lean on the end of, hey, you know, this is our man's a world record power lifter. Maybe he shouldn't have been doing all kinds of running. Well,
in terms of biology's adaptations over time,
absolutely. He's been powerlifting for 30 years, but don't forget, he was involved in football, he was involved in wrestling, he had a base of conditioning and also a very solid base of genetics to adapt to really any form of work capacity. This is a long way of saying, really don't think fatigue or overtraining or under recovery had much to do with this at all, purely based on his performance. He was having a PR workout at the time. That is something that does not happen when somebody is overtrained. When you are in a state of overtraining or under recovery, however you want to phrase it, performance is a leading indicator and not a lagging indicator. In the way in that performance is a predictor of this type of state rather than something that happens after this type of state has already occurred. The fact that he's even capable of having a PR workout means that his recovery was quite on point, because even if psychologically you took enough stimulants in order to go in there and quote unquote feel great, that does not mean you're going to perform great. Those are two very different things. The musculature and his overall chemistry would not have supported a PR workout if he was under recovered. So he's going into this thing, he is feeling absolutely fantastic, but he's got this entire cocktail of things going on with respect to his intra-workout nutrition. What was he having? Well, he was on about 600 grams of carbs per day at this point in time, which is quite a bit, and 100 grams of those carbs were coming in a liquid form of a very slow, resistant starch. This slow release carbohydrate is not very insulinogenic at all.
So it does not create much insulin secretion. And insulin's primary job, for those unfamiliar,
is to lower blood glucose. Its job is to find that glucose and then find a home for it, whether it be within the liver, whether it be within the kidneys, or primarily it's going to find a home for it in the musculature. But since this carbohydrate was very low insulinogenic in its nature, we had these carbs progressively increase in the bloodstream. And you might be thinking, well, why did the carbs progressively increase? I have carbs intra-workout and I don't run into a hyperglycemic event. Well, what happened is we're increasing these carbs, but we're also combining them with this newer ketone thing that he's doing. He had a very large dose of ketones at the time, which in the hypotheses displaced his carbohydrates. If ketones are readily available, they will be the preferred fuel source. So he had a very large dose of ketones to where this is providing the fuel for his systemic output, but he's also having a ton of carbohydrates co-consumed at the same time, where his carbohydrates are continuing to rise, while his body is trying to utilize these ketones currently at play. What happens here is this continues to rise, continues to rise, continues to rise, and then you start getting symptoms of hyperglycemia, which is very elevated blood sugar, which is the opposite of hypoglycemia, which is very low blood sugar. The weird thing about these two states is their symptoms are very, very, very similar. You are going to get the shakes, you are going to feel weak, you are going to have nausea. These things are mirror each other to the point where it's very often medical advice. If you think that your friend is going into a diabetic shock and then you call the ambulance will say, hey, get your friend a glass of juice, get your friend a Coca-Cola, not the diet kind, the one with the sugar, in case he is hypoglycemic, which is dangerous to the point where it can be a risk of life. So they will say, get in that sugar in case he's going hypoglycemic, and then by the time we get there, we can determine whether it's hypo or hyper. So Mark, having all of these symptoms, did the right thing, absolutely, in my opinion, by shutting down the workout and going to Starbucks and starting to smash orange juice. He starts smashing orange juice because he had all of these symptoms that replicate hypoglycemia. But he didn't know that he was actually in a state of hyperglycemia. So he continues to keep smashing these juices. Those juices get his hyperglycemia, which was already hyper, even higher than it already was. And then that's what really shut the ship down, and ended up calling an ambulance and then getting in the ambulance and finding out that his blood sugar was absolutely skyrocketed. So getting the juice in hindsight, or having that much, likely didn't help the situation at all. But those symptoms of hyperglycemia include extreme nausea. So he was vomiting during this time, which lowers serum electrolytes. So when I had a look at all his labs, he had very low magnesium, which is hypomagnesemia. He had very low potassium. These things, these electrolytes were dropping. So we were in this very strange situation where his electrolytes were dropping while his blood sugar was climbing. So we were getting more and more hyperglycemic while we were getting more and more dehydrated, which is not a good recipe for glucose disposal. You want to really get rid of the glucose at that time. So what did his body do? It induced a state of something known as glycosuria. Glycosuria is when you are urinating full molecules of glucose. It's basically a body's backup mechanism to where it says, hey,
There's not enough insulin around here right now
to get rid of these carbs that keep climbing. So I am just going to get it out in any way that I can, which means I am going to urinate out this glucose in its full form. That came back in his urinalysis. He had very high glucose in the urine, which is glycosuria. He had very low serum electrolytes due to vomiting, and he had very elevated blood sugar due to the displacement of his slow release, non-insulinogenic carbohydrates in combination with a probably too high dose of ketones at that time. Now, to add in an extra caveat, if there wasn't enough already at play, I warned you in the beginning of this video, this was a whole lot going on, that this can actually mirror some rhabdomyolysis. So rhabdo, a lot of people familiar with the destruction of muscle proteins to the point where you are in a state of rhabdo. It is very toxic for the system, and mild rhabdo can have symptoms within blood work of a couple of things. Number one, hypomagnesemia. Number two, elevations in blood glucose. So that very, very neatly fits into the story of the glycosuria, the displacement of the ketones, the glucose, all of that, right? But then this muscle breakdown, or perceived muscle breakdown, also represents that as well. However, his urine was clean, and something I can just tell you as a coach who's worked with tons and tons and tons of fighters who have in the past, not working with me by the way, but in the past have undergone poor weight cut protocols and then very long fights, and then they urinate something that looks like Coca-Cola. It is that brown when you have severe rhabdo. Mark's urine in his urinalysis was clear, but it was a strange combination
because he underwent something known as a test known as a urine-specific gravity,
which measures the concentration of one's urine. You can probably imagine what dehydrated urine looks like. Very concentrated, kind of cloudy, very colorful. But when you're hydrated, it's quite clear, right? Mark had clear urine that was concentrated. Well, that was actually this weird combination of having fluid in the system, but also having glycosuria. So this entire situation of it still remaining clear lets us know that the rhabdo was wildly minimal, if even present at all. So between all of those variables, our man also had enough kratom in his system to still feel good during the process and probably mask a lot of the symptoms that would otherwise have triggered him to shut the workout down earlier than he otherwise would have. I believe he was on interval 6 or 7 when he decided to shut things down. Perhaps if there wasn't enough artificial stimulants in his system at that point in time, he could have shut it down earlier and avoided the problem altogether. But between all of those, between the lab work that we have now, we've got a real good depiction on what happened. We've got an excellent depiction of what we're gonna do moving forward, and we're also taking action moving forward. I had Mark do more blood work yesterday so that we can get him 100% cleared and healthy and ensure he's ready to rock moving forward in this thing. And I also sent him a sweat test to make sure that you can actually put something on your forearm. It's going to measure the electrolyte concentration of the sweat that you're outputting so that I can get an indication on, are there any extremes in his electrolytes, or was that just associated to that one-time event? I'm going to take a look at his blood work to see, are there any extremes still in his blood work, such as creatine kinase, which might be elevated in response to true rhabdo.
Is that there, or can we clear our boy to continue training?
In terms of the danger behind what happened, this type of situation is absolutely dangerous, and this is why we're talking about it. One thing that happened when Mark did his post about this was that a lot of people who have never come forward before about an event like this happening during training began to come forward. People from all walks of training. It didn't matter if it was strength, bodybuilding, powerlifting, strongman, long endurance running. It didn't matter. Everybody had some form of a story. So I actually want to point out that yes, this type of situation was dangerous, and that's why an ambulance was called. But I'm also really proud of what Mark's doing and what him and I are doing together right now to bring more awareness to this type of thing. Because sometimes these extreme goals require a lot of extreme measure in order to make sure that things like this don't happen. And there's no tool more powerful than understanding what you're getting into. If you want to set an extreme goal, make sure you are checking all the boxes with respect to doing the entire process as healthy as you can, and understand that there's probably a lot of influencers out there and a lot of people even in your local city who have undergone an event like this and just simply aren't talking about it due to their ego or due to them trying to appear as an expert or any combination of the above. All of this is being utilized so that Mark can be back on the road for the Boston Marathon, safe, healthy, and ready to rock. A lot of complex science goes behind this thing. If you want to learn more and follow our journey, check me out at Dan Garner Nutrition on Instagram.